Welcome to the Purple Sky Thinking for Leaders podcast. This podcast is for you if you lead people, teams, or the organisation. You might be a leader or a manager yourself, or you might be part of the support team to help those people to be really successful. I'm Anwen Bottois. I'm the leadership success coach and founder of Purple Sky Consulting, and I'm going to be the host for this podcast. My mission is to help as many leaders as possible to really love what they do. I want to help you to feel more confident, more capable, more effective, so that you can build and grow happy, healthy, more successful teams. This podcast is going to be all about helping you to love leading.
Hello, welcome to this new episode of the Purple Sky Thinking for Leaders podcast. Today, I'm really delighted to be joined by Helen Bailey of Coruscate Training. In this episode, we're going to be focusing on engagement and why engagement is so important for you as a leader of your team, your department. We'll be looking at what contributes to engagement positively and negatively, and some of the things you can be thinking about as a leader. Right, let's get started. Hello, Helen. Welcome to this episode. Really lovely to have you with us.
Hello, and lovely to be here.
So we are going to start off with kind of our intro question, and that's tell us a little bit about yourself. What would you like our listeners, our viewers, to know about you?
I always want to start with that saying I'm amazing, because why wouldn't you? But really, I'm Helen. I have my own business, Coruscate Training, and I'm an MD specialist, and I kind of focus on what I would call meaningful MD. And what I mean by that, there is a lot of MD out there that is come and have a nice time, and there's sweets and there's Post-its, but I really want to have those conversations that matter. And I think to aid that, I often describe myself as constantly curious as well. It just means I'm really nosy. And I ask a lot of questions. I'm really interested in so many things.
That's good. It's good to be curious. I've done a post on curiosity today, so I don't know whether that was meant to be.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent.
It's like fate.
So tell us a little bit more about what you do then with your work. So you love that curiosity. What else is going on there?
There's kind of two sides to it. I'm really passionate about leadership development. I'm really passionate about diversity, equality, and inclusion. And I think that side of the work that I do is about the what people bring to a business, that real sort of passion, energy, and really that's related to the topic. And then my other side is what I'm going to call my analytical side. I have a very strong sense of analytics and, so I'm really interested in critical thinking, and why we don't always critically think, which is kind of interesting in the light of, an election that's about to happen in America and the election we've had earlier this year, but that's a whole other podcast.
That is.
Yeah. And also the evidence-based principles, and really thinking about, I think one of my pet hates about LD is when people say, oh, come and do some team building for us. And I always say, well, what do you want to get out of that? And it'll be like to have a nice time, let's say. And I'll be like, go bowling. You don't need me for that. I'm not there for that. Well, it's true. And I think in terms of engagement, I think that's kind of, what can we do? But also I think it's about the measurement, the other side, which we don't always do. We think about the whizzy slides and the pool tables and the PlayStations. But we don't always get into the, well, has it worked?
It's such an important area to look at to know whether you're having impact on things, isn't it? And that's no different for leaders as well. When you're doing things with your team, are you having impact? Which I'm sure we're going to touch on today with our topic of engagement.
We absolutely are.
Delve into the detail of our conversation. As you will know, and I'm sure people that have started listening to this podcast have got the theme that I love a bit of travel. So tell me a little bit about your favourite travel experience or holiday destination.
Do you know what? This is not as exciting as perhaps some other guests will. Anybody who knows me will know that I hate flying. I went to Belfast a couple of years ago to do a session, and it was the most traumatic experience of my life.
Oh, bless you. Yeah.
Because it wasn't a proper plane. That's the first thing. Like a big one. It was like one of those you get an elastic band with, and then they just... I won't name the company, but I think if you know who goes to Belfast, you'll work it out. So it was kind of scary. So I've gone for the Yorkshire Wildlife Park in Doncaster.
And really?
And the reason being is that they have 6 polar bears, and one of whom is called Nobby, and his birthday is on the 9th of December. Don't ask how I know that. And just because when my husband was 50, we went to feed the polar bears. So there is some kind of, big connection between us and them. And it's just one of our favourite places to visit.
Oh, fantastic. I've never been there before, so we can kind of think about putting that on our list of places to visit. So thank you for that. So what we're doing, because obviously our viewers, our listeners are in leadership roles, or they're maybe aspiring to be in leadership roles, or supporting people in leadership roles. So we always like to hear from our guests about their own leadership experiences. So tell me a little bit about yours and what that means for you.
I think in terms of leadership, I think it's in a couple of settings. One is a very sort of project setting in terms of implementing usually the engagement strategies. And the other side of that is actually line managing teams. So it kind of sits in both those pits. I think if I think about that, and I remember my very first leadership job, I was a checkout manager for Tesco, and I wasn't, what was I, about 22, I think, biggest team in the entire store, so there's 90 of them. And I mean, to be honest, I look back and I think, why did anyone let me loose on that many people? But it was kind of a very interesting challenge, because you got 90 people, all very different, all doing kind of all kinds of shifts, and doing what wasn't essentially, and I hate to say it, but not a completely fulfilling job, because there's only so much scanning and sort of beeping you can do. And I think the biggest lesson I take away from that was that just being able to adapt to that, because the challenge of, I remember sort of, very busy before bank holidays, because everybody's buying like barbecue, beer stuff, and, and just, the pace of it, and being able to, respond to people in that moment, in a very busy moment, and take that time. I've never forgotten that. But then I kind of go sort of much more recently and managing an LD team, and I think my lesson from that one was about not taking it personally. I've done a lot of interim work. I was brought in to kind of, let's going to say revitalise the team. Let's go with that, and really kind of shake it up and make it much more effective. And I remember one of the team wanting to take a grievance out against me, because it was, it was quite a conflict, situation. And actually, I think at the early part of my career, I would have gone, that's awful. And at that time, it was like, actually, it probably just needs doing.
Yeah.
Let's have that full let's have that full investigation. Let's have that full frank discussion about it, because I've tried having this frank discussion and it's not really happening. So I think it's, just remembering it's not always personal. And I think also perspective is really useful.
Totally. I think those reflections on perspective is so important. It's like, what can you do? You can't control how other people are going to behave. All you can do is try and influence and do your best as well. And taking note of that as a leader is pretty important, isn't it? Of like, just take care of people, but also take care of yourself alongside that is very, very important.
What does Simon Sinek? It's taking charge of the people you're in charge. I'm going to misquote him, because I always do, but you know which one I'm referring to. But it's that taking care of the people, you're in charge of. Yeah,
absolutely. That shift, really interesting. I did a stint on the checkout in Tesco. I was part of my end last year at university, and I will never ever forget it was either the Saturday or Sunday I was in before Christmas. And arriving on an early shift, so I was starting earlier than I would normally. So I think I was arriving at the checkout for 6.
Yeah.
And every checkout was like 5 or 6 customers deep already at 6 a.m. because it was one of those big 24-hour stores. Oh my God. And I will never forget the lady who wanted me to pack her 250 quid's worth of shopping.
While you were scanning it, yeah, absolutely. I think my favourite memory of a Christmas Eve, because I worked in retail quite a lot, and is separating some ladies over some fresh sprouts and kind of with the comment, because I'm not a cook, so it doesn't do it for me. With we have frozen ones, don't you?
Wow. Yeah, I imagine in retail you've got lots of very interesting stories from that perspective, which again might be another podcast episode.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we're talking about engagement today and the role that leaders play in that, but also the impact that it can have on the team, the wider delivery, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what we're focusing on today, engagement. Talk to me a little bit about your thoughts on the reality of engagement. What's happening in that space?
Do you know what? I think I started off thinking about this, thinking it's quite a mixed message, but I think it's more of a dark message with a few bits of hope. And I don't want that to be too depressing for anybody. But I think, the Gallup state of work, when that comes out, that's the one that gets the headlines because it talks about this 13% are engaged at work, 63% are not engaged, 16% are actively disengaged. I know, yeah. Straight away you kind of go, oh. That kind of makes the shoulders thing. But then you kind of look at, the UK is 33rd out of 38 countries in Europe in terms of engagement. And I think there are lots of things that kind of feed into that. I think people are, dissatisfied, the cost of living crisis, all those kind of things kind of feed into that. There is a need for more wages and, all the rest of it. But then, the other side of that is the CIPD asked people, what's the word you would use to describe how you feel about work? And people went enthusiastic. So I do think there may be a stats thing going on there, where I've been asked about it and I feel I should say I'm very enthusiastic. So I'm not sure. And I think you've also got, why did people leave their last job? And people talk about better paying conditions. That hasn't changed.
Yeah.
Work-life balance. I think the whole conversation about work-life balance is so interesting, and the role that that's playing. We had the pandemic, everybody worked at home. Now there is, Amazon are probably the most recent organisation to say 5 days back in the office, off you go.
Yeah.
Madness,
total madness.
Well, you just kind of think what would happen, if people didn't do it, but people do, and there's a whole cost associated with that, isn't there? Whether it's childcare or petrol or, all the other things. And I think the other thing that's quite interesting is people talk about, why did I leave my last job? It's unhappiness with senior managers. And I think that's an interesting point because it's not about my line manager. It's the top of the business. And I think that is a big shift now. People are talking about, what's the direction of the organisation? Where are they going? How are they behaving?
Yes. Does it feel like I have purpose here, value here? Yeah.
Yes. Do I feel I'm doing something that makes a difference here?
It's so interesting, isn't it? When you look at the kind of the dynamics that are going on there, and the work-life balance, flexible working thing is also another episode, but
another podcast.
Absolutely. And what I find so interesting about it is the limitations on the talent pool you want to be fishing in when you put those kinds of constraints on your organization. And it shows such a lack of creativity in terms of how people want to go about leading in their organization and enabling their leaders to do that really well. So I just find that so interesting. And maybe that's because of my own experiences of wanting a much more flexible working pattern for myself, because I knew I needed it for my own well-being and those types of things. And this was pre-pandemic. And knowing that after the pandemic, it was like, there is no way you could ever put me back into an office 5 days a week and for me to be happy and okay with that.
I think that whole notion of 9 till 5, I think, it's a good job we're doing this in the morning because afternoons are not my thing. I'm kind of like a morning, early evening kind of person. And for me, working in an office, it's kind of weird. I'm like, I'll go and have a nap in the afternoon, but apparently that's not allowed. That'll get you fired.
Apparently that's not allowed. But it's and I think this is we're probably going to get into some of this in terms of the engagement. I think, what's your measure of success within your organization? Is it that people are at their desks at a certain point or working at a certain point of the day? Or is it that they are delivering on what you need from them and delivering on that in a great way? And that's just a completely different mindset approach to how you think about your organization and your workforce within your organization. So yeah, really interesting. So talk to me about the impacts of having high engagement. When a team has really good high engagement, what's the impact for them? And also for a leader, why should they care about the levels of engagement for their team?
Because it's amazing. I think it is like the best. We often talk about it. I think there's a really interesting definition where it talks about the thriving thing. So I often talk about thriving and surviving, and that surviving is, we'll probably talk about that in a minute when we talk about the other side of this. Yeah. But that thriving side, where I am happy and, I am able to do my best work. And I've done my best work because that's been enabled in the organisation. And the great phrase I'm looking for here is psychological owners. And I think it's a great expression. I own the work. I feel comfortable talking about, do you know what? I don't think we should do that. I think we should do something else. When I was doing my CIPD qualifications, I remember the biggest thing that we talked about again and again was John Purcell's and his black box model. And I have to bring it up now at every opportunity because I don't think I've ever really had a chance since then. But he talks about that discretionary effort, and that's the bit that you do above and beyond. And I think for a leader, if you can have people, and this is not about overworking, it's not about burnout, it's about people giving that extra bit of care and attention.
Yeah.
And I think if you have that, it's almost like an ideas factory. There is, I think both you and I probably spend a lot of time sat in receptions of companies, and I think you can tell when you're sat there what that vibe is in the organisation. I always think, have I been offered a cup of coffee? Are people walking past me and going, hi, even though they've got no idea who I am, or are they just ignoring me?
Yeah.
And I think that you can really tell from that. I mean, I'm not suggesting that everybody goes and sits receptions at places because that'd be weird. But, I think it really does you really get that kind of high energy bounce from it.
And I think there's another, way of looking at it of like, we can kind of talk positively about why it's useful, but actually, you just need to ask yourself that question of when is it that I perform at my best? And if the answer isn't in some way, shape or form because I've been actively engaged in what I'm doing and I'm given the tools, support I need to do that really well, and then are given the autonomy to get on and do it, I'd be amazed if many people aren't kind of pointing at those things, which just goes to show that if that's what you need as a leader, you better damn right be giving that to your team too, create that space for them.
And I wonder how many times we ask, actually. I was doing a careers talk a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things I always talk about is, and I think it takes a while to work it out, is know what enables you to thrive at work.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But also ask that question of your team. I mean, I think if you go at them and say, so tell me, how do you thrive at work? I think they'll probably go, oh, hang on a minute. It's more about what can I do to help you do your best work here?
Yeah. Yeah.
That question, I think.
Asking those questions.
For me, sort of, and it doesn't, go and have a coffee, do whatever, but, what will help you do your best work?
Absolutely. And I think as a side note for anybody who's kind of listening to this who maybe supports leaders in organizations rather than necessarily be a leader themselves, the engagement levels of your leaders, wow, that is critical too. That you cannot ignore the value and importance of ensuring that your leaders are in a great place. And I think quite often we're talking about the individuals within organizations rather than necessarily the leaders, even though they are individuals in the organization. I think we need to sometimes take a slightly different lens to things when we're thinking about people in leadership roles.
Interestingly enough, I was just going to say the Gallup survey talks about managers are more likely to be more engaged than the team. And I was actually talking about this with a group a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things we talked about was actually, is that because managers have more autonomy to drive the space? And also that they're more likely to be engaged if they're working flexibly as well.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Totally get that. So tell us a little bit What's the impact of low engagement for the team, the leader?
When I thought about this, Harry Redknapp said something really interesting. It was a long time ago, and I think it was when he was actually a football manager, and he talks about the Dementors in Harry Potter and kind of sucking the life and soul out of a team. And I think it's really applicable here. It's really like the Dementors have moved in, if I'm really honest. It's really grim. And I think because you've got these two, the Gallup survey talks about not engaged, which is the quiet quitting kind of engaged. I'm going to do just enough to get by. Not really causing any ripples there. But then you've got these 16% who are actively disengaged.
Mm-hmm.
Or loudly quitting, as it's known.
Yeah. Influencing that mood hoovery stuff. Yeah,
absolutely. So disrupting, kind of pulling back from anything that's trying to be achieved by the team, that is a hard gig. And potentially, I think a leader in that space is kind of looking at those sort of 16% and probably spending most time on those. So the people who are quietly quitting are just quietly quitting and getting on with it. Those people who are actively disengaged, the leader's spending a lot of time with those people.
Well, sometimes they're not, because it's terrifying to try and deal with it, and therefore it just like mushrooms or balloons or however you want to look at that, and has actually an even greater impact on what's going on in the team
because it's not being managed, and then it becomes about credibility. I think. I'm going to misquote Simon Sinek yet again, because why not?
But we'll put the real quotes in the notes. Okay.
No, this is a video, so you can go and watch the video. But it has this great quote about this great video about motivating and the unmotivated. It's a couple of minutes long, and he talks about when we look at people, we kind of make these assumptions, and I think leaders sometimes do that about why they're not motivated. They should be motivated. I provide them with a slippy slide to come to work or whatever it is I've done. But he kind of says, he kind of talks about we should take a reflective view because we recruited them. Mm-hmm. We brought them into the organisation. And that kind of started me thinking about good leavers then, and about the way we, people who aren't engaged, how do we kind of, when they leave the organisation, how do we make them good leavers? Because, there's that whole thing about them then becoming advocates for the organisation. Because I think quite often in organisations, people hand their notice in and we take it really personally. And suddenly you're kind of excluded from, the meeting or...
It's crazy.
Or bits of your kit start disappearing because you won't need it in 4 weeks because you'll be gone, and all that kind of thing. So, and I think if you've got a high turnover, that's draining as well for the team.
Yeah.
Because
you've got to get used to new people, or you've got a lack of resource, or
you're constantly trying to do extra work, which kind of then takes us into that burnout world. Yeah,
definitely. So, what action do you think leaders should be taking to try and ensure they've got much higher levels of engagement with their team?
So, the top factor is having a supportive manager. That is the top thing. I think it's really interesting that, if you look at like motivational theory, which kind of links to this, Maslow and Hertzberg and all of those kind of people, there's a lot of things that have carried over from that.
Totally. Yes.
That hasn't gone away. It's sort of 80 years later, bit of maths. But yeah, having a high supportive manager is the thing. The other things that really make a difference, open communication, I think transparency. Flexible working. I feel like I've kind of banged the drum for flexible working enough now. Recognition, and I think the recognition thing is really interesting because it's quite often associated with the big things, But I think sometimes, so when I used to work with my team, I used to buy them breakfast.
Yeah.
And it's a little thing, and it would be a thing we did once a month on a Friday. We'd go and have breakfast together, and it wasn't a chat about work. It was just a chat about stuff.
Connecting. Yeah.
Yes, connecting. Yeah. And I think it's the taking an interest doesn't go away. Taking an interest, having that sort of, I'm going to say normal conversations about football, whatever it is, all those kind of things. I think there's also the voice things, can I say?
Is it safe?
Is it safe? I think, the Amy Evanson, psychological safety isn't going away. I think it's very sort of sound. And I think I love the way she describes it as felt candor. I really like that, because it's not like I've got a thing on my wall saying we are lovely to our people. I feel it.
Yes.
I can't believe any organisation has got that on the wall, by the way. That we I think the other thing is that the constructive relationships, and I know when we kind of talked about doing this, I talked about robust conversations as well. And I think, it ties in with psychological safety, but quite often there's a kind of imbalance in relationships at work. And I think we feel frightened to kind of either give feedback and leaders don't necessarily encourage that space. So if you say to your leader, well, actually, I didn't like it when you did that, and you go, well, that's the way things are, that's kind of not encouraged, that conversation. No. And there was an interesting bit of that was an interesting bit of research after the pandemic, that when people went back to work, they didn't know how to behave anymore.
Interesting. Yeah.
Because I'd been sitting at my kitchen table or wherever doing my work. It had all been done through a screen, and then suddenly I've got real people next to me.
Yeah. They're annoying.
Well, that's another podcast.
Or I'm really happy to see them. It's one or the other, isn't it?
Yeah. People, why are they really annoying? Let's discuss. So I think it's, it's not massive. There are I think what leaders always think, and you and I spend a lot of time in the leadership development space, think there is a magic key, or there is a magic thing that you do this and it'll definitely work. Well, yeah, there isn't. I'm glad the fact you're shaking your head. It is about, take an interest in people, get to know them, and share some of yourself, because I think that is useful. I don't think people do that enough. I totally agree
with you. I think about my own experiences where I've had leaders that have kind of I felt fully bought into, and that I have gone those extra miles and stuff, and that I have push myself more because of that, and not necessarily, like you say, time, just in terms of my delivery, what I wanted to produce as a result for that person. And that, the fundamentals that sat behind with that is I knew they cared about me. I knew they wanted me to succeed. I knew all those things that were really critical to me feeling able to perform. And the reverse of that is the leaders that made me feel unsafe, made me feel vulnerable in the wrong ways, were the ones that I shut down. My performance was nowhere near the same. And you look at that and go, how can the one person who's the same person, that demonstrates the impact that you have as a leader in terms of influencing the same person's performance or different people in your team's performance, and your ability to connect with them, to build that relationship. And I thought it was really interesting, that first point about supportive leaders. We talked a bit about this with Emma Lloyd on the last episode, and support doesn't mean being soft. Support doesn't mean dipping out of difficult challenges or avoiding issues. High support comes with high expectations, in my opinion, for it to be really valuable and absolutely. For it really to engage you and to drive performance. So that's really where we want leaders to be thinking about, is be open, be vulnerable, have those connections, create that opportunity to have a human-to-human, adult-to-adult relationship with your team, and then support the hell out of them.
Absolutely. And I think, I think we're a bit averse to direct conversations, but some people really appreciate a direct conversation. I had an experience where a senior manager, somebody I would normally have a conversation with, set up a Teams call. About 20 minutes in, we're still chatting, and I'm kind of I don't know what the point is. She said, I've got something really difficult to tell you. And I said, just say it. I can take it. And I think Absolutely. That is really important, kind of knowing when you can be a bit more direct.
Absolutely. Because it's honest, isn't it? What we don't want is people to hide feedback from us. We don't want people to, you might think you're saving my feelings, but actually you're not helping me grow. You're not helping me change the view people might have of me in the business, because actually there's something really problematic I'm doing, which is causing now me to have a reputation issue, but I don't know about it, so I can't fix it.
Now you are going down the route of my Kim Scott. I love Kim Scott and her ruinous empathy. Yeah. That the idea of this, they're such a nice person. They bring the donuts in and the coffee, and therefore I can't possibly tell them they're really rubbish at their job. I think if we could solve those conversations, work would be a better place.
Absolutely. And do you know what? You have to realize though that it is about building your relationships first. You
Yeah.
can't, you can't just go in day one and go, "Oh, I really don't like the way you do that." I mean, you can, but it's going to make it a lot harder to kind of build that relationship and to focus on
I
things.
think you might be looking for another job quite shortly
Yeah,
after.
absolutely.
Yeah. I think the culture fit
So,
might not be
no,
exactly
the
there.
culture that might not be a good fit. So, what would be your tips for leaders then to keep on top of understanding the levels of engagement with their team?
I think, I've done a lot of work where, I've been brought in, we do staff surveys, we do all that kind of piece. And I think, you know, I think sometimes the questions that get asked, I know the Gallup 12 question, do you have a best friend at work? That's slightly controversial. People get a bit irate about that. I don't need a best friend at work. I think James Simpson has got a really interesting question. It's just one, how happy on a scale of 1 to 10 are you with your manager
Yeah.
or leader? I think you're a brave leader to do that face to face. I'm not sure whether many leaders would want to do that. But I think I'm a big fan of regular check-ins. If you have a team meeting, if you're doing an event of some description, get people to share a picture, a word, something about how they're feeling, because that is your temperature check right in that moment. And if you do it often enough, and I think as the leader, you have to be the one to kind of say, do you know what, I'm not feeling so great today, and now we're on to Brené Brown and that feeling vulnerable piece. But, I think that kind of encourages your team and that enables you to pick up with them. And you make it, it's a regular thing. People get used to it.
And once they know it's a regular thing and you're going to do something with it, or at least start a conversation on the back of it, it might be that you can't fix it, If what's causing the disengagement is at a global level, they've changed the system that's now being used and it's an absolute pain in the backside, and that's really getting in the way of you having a positive day that day. Do you know what? There might be some stuff that your manager really, really can't do about that, or you as a leader can't fix. But you can listen and you can support and you can help them try and find solutions to stuff and you can help them provide feedback. It's the follow up that I think is so important for leaders there. Of do those check-ins, absolutely. Do something with it, even if it's just talk about it. Yeah.
And all of those things, I think just even being able to say something out loud is incredibly powerful. Even if I can just say, I really hate it when that happens. And maybe there's nothing I can do about it, but I said it and it's out,
absolutely.
in that place.
Can I add a tip in? Is that all right?
No, because this is all about me and I don't know where you thought you could have a go, but go on.
No, but I'm going to do it anyway because it is my podcast, so I'm going to add the tip.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're a leader joining a team and you can feel that there is low engagement or low trust or low anything, a good way to start building that is to ask those questions anonymously. So, of course, we want to be in a place where people can actively, openly share those feelings and those ideas and kind of open those up. But where there's a gap in terms of how you want it to be and actually what the reality is, you need to demonstrate to people that you mean it. So something I've done before is provide anonymous surveys or kind of those little questions that you can put out to people. And like you say, those temperature checks, you can do those anonymously as well. Or you can say, here's an area for you to put blind questions into so that when we have a team meeting, I'll answer those questions. So that you're creating that opportunity to go, oh, actually, they actually really mean it. And they can demonstrate that they are going to take action and that they are going to hear what people are saying. So that would be one thing. If you're starting somewhere new and it's not there, do it anonymously and create the space to build that trust.
Yeah, I just want to, if that's okay, I'm asking your permission now. It's all gone all very polite. All of a sudden,
you don't have
to. I did a piece of work last year where we went in and instead of doing a staff survey, we interviewed everybody. And it wasn't a massive organisation. But what was really interesting is that people came with sheets. And it wasn't that there was lots of problems. It was more about they'd never had the opportunity to say.
Yes.
And it was really interesting, and that encouraged that dialogue to start in the organisation because, bringing an outside company in, and this is not touting for work, but can be useful because they've got no skin in the game.
Absolutely.
And so because we've got no skin in the game, it's kind of, we found out a lot of things that perhaps hadn't come to the surface before. So
I think what's really interesting about that is that kind of crossover between, when I interview my clients, rather than give them a form to fill in to give me feedback, but I might interview them at the end of the time we've worked together, the detail and the depth that you get from having a conversation with somebody about those types of questions rather than just putting it on a form, night and day. Yeah,
absolutely.
And I think you're right in terms of kind of actually how do you have discussions about topics rather than just asking questions in that way. I think, it's a really lovely balance to be had there. Thank you so much for all sharing your insight and your ideas around engagement and the impacts that has for leaders. And hopefully, if you've been listening to this and you're a leader or support leaders, feel free to add into the comments any thoughts or ideas that you've had on this topic as well. So, Helen, where can people find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. It's probably the easiest way to find me. The difficulty being there are lots of Helen Baileys.
Yes.
So what you need to look for is somebody who looks a little bit quirky because my head's to one side. And also the award-winning Helen Bailey, because that's how I describe myself on LinkedIn.
Excellent.
So let's look for that. And do get in touch, and I'm all for a bit of a coffee and a chat, always.
Excellent. So thank you for joining this episode. I hope you found it useful, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for joining this episode of the Purple Sky Thinking for Leaders podcast. You'll find all the resources and the links that we mentioned down in the show notes. If you love this episode, why not share it with somebody else in a leadership role who you think would find this useful? If you haven't already, I'd love for you to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. And if we've earned it, why not leave us a 5-star review? I'm Anwen, your host, and I look forward to welcoming you back to the Purple Sky Thinking for Leaders podcast very soon. Bye for now.